I'd like to welcome everyone to this regular council meeting for the Township of Puslinch, November 20th, 2019. We'll start with disclosure of pecuniary interest and general nature thereof.
Yes, I have pecuniary interest in item number 7.6, various compliance assessment reports. And the pecuniary interest is that a family member operates an aggregate business in the township.
Okay, thank you. All right. And then, well, we got a few minutes. First, we'll go to adoption of receipt of minutes. November 6th, 2019 regular council meeting. Any questions or comments on that one? No? Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Sapoulos, that the minutes of the following minutes be adopted as written and distributed. November 6th, 2019 regular council meeting. All in favor? Carried. And a couple minutes early, but we'll ask our first delegation to come down to the desk, please. That's Jen Baker. She's here. Is she here yet? Thank you. So whenever you're ready, just speak
Okay.
into the microphone and.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Thanks for letting me come and speak to you tonight. I'm Jen Baker. I'm with the Hamilton Naturalists Club, and I'm here with David Brewer, who owns the land that we're going to be talking about. So David Brewer, he owns like 33 acres of land on Puslinch Road 1. And he is also a member of the Hamilton Naturalists Club, and he wants to donate about 22, the survey is still being done, so about 22 acres, so part of his back 40 to the Hamilton Naturalists Club, just to be protected forever. So that's his reason for wanting to make the donation, is just to make sure that we'll take care of the land forever. And in case you're not familiar with the club, we're 100 years old now, so founded in 1919. We have more than 600 members. We're a charitable nonprofit organization, and we've been protecting land since 1961. So we were the first organization in Ontario to acquire land just because it needed to be protected. You know, it had lots of endangered species, a lovely forest, and since then we've acquired 7 additional properties. So to date, we've protected over 455 acres of environmentally significant lands, and we're responsible for taking care of those to the best of our abilities forever. Some of those properties we have some trails, and some of them we just have, we have a property that's in the middle of the Beverly Swamp. We don't go there very often because it's in the middle of the Beverly Swamp. So we have those kind of properties as well. And so kind of the range of things. And we put trails on properties and have use on properties where we can maintain it. Like, we're a volunteer-led club with like 1.5 staff people, and I'm one of those people. So we do what we can maintain over the long haul. And so I guess that's kind of the background, and I guess why I wanted to come here tonight and tell you guys this story is that because this property donation, it requires a severance because it's only part of the property, and we had a very good meeting with Wellington County planning staff, who kind of walked us through what the severance process is for Puslinch and Wellington County. And then we were told about some of the fees for the severance. And those fees make a lot of sense if you're getting a benefit, I think, from the severance. But it's really steep for a charitable organization and somebody who just wants to donate his land because it's protected forever. So the benefit, I guess, is for nature and all of the critters that depend on that property being there forever, but there isn't like a financial benefit. So I guess we're here tonight to see if you guys would entertain the option of waiving the fees for us in this case of the severance. So I guess that's why we're here and why you guys are hearing this great story about this resident who wants to donate his land. But that's why we're here tonight.
Okay, thank you. And just for some background information for council, when I was initially contacted about this proposition, I contacted the county, and they said there is a path for you to apply to have these fees reduced. And just for your information, those fees might be doubling for next year with the cost recovery initiative the county's going forward. So
Right.
the number you were given might be substantially more. I thought it was a benefit for you to come to council and us to endorse your proposition. We cannot waive the fees. We have a
Right.
very minor fee, and it's in the hundreds of dollars currently.
$200, I think.
$200. I would be in support of even waiving that fee for you. My concern is that, you mentioned until the end of time, but in another 100 years, if the Naturalist Club doesn't exist, will it stay protected property? And is there any language in the agreement, the donation, to ensure that it doesn't be sold for other uses or?
There is. So for all of our properties, because this is, we've thought about this over many decades, we have it written in that all of our, if something happened to the club, then we have it written in that the properties would go to a like-minded organization. And we used to have an organization named, but we turn 100 and we're gonna
Others didn't.
outlast everybody. We went through the wars, we went through the Depression, but we do have that written in that all of our properties would go to a like-minded organization, whatever made sense at the time.
Okay, so I'll open up to council. I believe what you're looking for from us is just an endorsement that you can take with you to the County
Wellington.
Planning Committee, endorsing, the waiving of the fee. So, Councillor Palmer?
Oh,
My left-hand man here says that you're first. so-
oh, thank
I
you.
was the first last time.
All righty. Thank you very much for your presentation. Welcome to the
Thank you.
council meeting here. Fascinating. I could ask you all sorts of questions about your organization, but you're not here to talk about that. I guess to address the concern that the mayor has raised regarding the future, I think we're very fortunate in that recently we changed our development charges, how we collect our development charges. So in the event this was to be sold and someone decided to put a house on it, we now collect our development charges at the issuing of the building permit now. So if things changed, we would be covered off, and I have no issue supporting a recommendation to the county that, because this is not for development purposes,
Right.
that this is something different. The challenge, the only question I have, this isn't exactly comparable, but we have a charity right now that's going through the rezoning process, or recently went through the rezoning process, and, we would have liked to have been able to give them a break too, but they didn't ask, so. Anyway, I have no issue supporting what you're trying to achieve, especially since the township will still be able to recover development charges if development should ever occur in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And, sorry, if I can add, one thing I forgot to mention is that the donation, it's going through the Federal Ecological Gifts Program. So this is a program of Environment Canada that works with Revenue Canada. So the donation is certified through the feds. So if anything happened, and I can't imagine it happening, but let's say worst case, the club completely goes 180, then the federal government would come after the club because we will have a formal agreement with them about the land remaining as it is
Right,
in perpetuity.
super.
Councillor Gwynna?
Thanks for coming and presenting. I just have a couple of questions. When you say that it'll be protected forever, what do you mean by protected? Is it just protected from development or protected from Is it just development that we're speaking of?
I guess it is development. So our plans are to just not have any use on the property. We might have like an annual hike for our members there. We might do some invasive species management, but that would be the only use. So I guess protected from everything else.
Would this property have any public, would the public have access to this property, or would it remain sort of out of, like as a private piece of land?
Yeah, it would remain private because we're not really planning on putting trails in. Just the way the property is, it would be really, really hard to maintain open trails. So we wouldn't be able to maintain trails, I guess, to the standards that we've created for ourselves. And so we would just have it as like an annual hike that I guess anybody could come to, but that would be it.
Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Councillor Spoulos?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that if you have an annual hike, anybody can come to it. My big concern is the residents of Puslinch have the opportunity as well, and not strictly the Naturalist Club, to attend the hikes. So that's a good sign. I'm be willing to support this in principle. The only caveat is if the Wellington County turns it back to us to pay the severance fees, I'd have a concern with that.
Okay.
Do we need a motion to support this? So can we get a motion? So can we have a quick discussion about, we're in principle supporting the waiving of the county fees. Can we in principle waive our fees as well? The $200 approximately?
Yeah, I'm okay with that, yeah.
Okay, so do you want to?
Yeah, okay, I'll put a motion forward that we in principle support the delegation's request for waiving the fees and the county fees be contingent on us not absorbing those fees.
Okay. Do we have a seconder on that? Councillor Bulmer? All in favor? Carried. You have your support. Well, all right.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Spoulos, that the council receives a presentation by Jen Baker, Hamilton's Naturalist Club. All in favor?
Oh, yeah, no kidding.
Carried. So we're just going to jump ahead a little bit.
Just before you,
Sorry. Councillor?
is there some way we could, if this goes through, is there some way we can thank the owner of the property for this generous donation? Actually, as Councillor Spoulos pointed out, this is going to be something that the residents of Puslinch, any of them who either join that Naturalist Club or attend the things, I don't want to lose track of this. I think that landowners should be recognized for their donation to essentially to the community in perpetuity.
What were you thinking for thanking him? So,
He's here.
oh, he's sitting there. Yeah, he's sitting there.
Well, perhaps if this is successful, I think it'd be nice to at least acknowledge them with a thank you letter to
Oh, absolutely.
the residents. So, don't want to lose it off our radar.
Okay. I'll keep that in mind once we're at the.
Well, we
county.
can add it to the motion if you like.
Okay. Courtney's adding it to the motion, if everybody's comfortable with that.
Yes.
Thank you for pointing that out here.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll invite Blair down for his report. We're going to jump ahead. Blair lives a little bit further away, so we're just going to try and get to his report
Ooh, the property standards?
first. Is that? Yeah.
With the big one first, hey?
Maybe, could I just set this up just a little bit? I think our bylaw enforcement officer has been given the responsibility of updating our property standards bylaw. So there's been several meetings to work on that, on the bylaw itself. There's a draft bylaw that's before you tonight. We wanted to make it clear that the purpose really of bringing this forward tonight is for information purposes. You're not being asked to actually pass the bylaw because there may be some other ideas that some members of council might have. So the notion is that, in fact, we've already heard a little bit about some ways to make some improvements to the bylaw. So the idea is to bring the bylaw back when it's completed after this meeting, at the next council meeting for council's consideration. So you're not being asked to approve anything tonight.
Thank you, Mr. CEO. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just give you just a bit of background on why we want to get this new bylaw through. So the legislation has changed for property standards, and our current property standards bylaw is outdated. The current property standards bylaw takes its authority from the Planning Act, This legislation has changed. So the authority for municipalities to pass a property standards bylaw for the standards and maintenance of properties comes from the building code now. Another big part of this, as you know, is municipalities now need to enforce residential rental maintenance standards, which we believe this bylaw allows us to do. So just a refresher, there was a public meeting back in June where there were some concerns from that meeting. Some of those concerns were rights of entry into a dwelling, the requirement of a kitchen backsplash and neatly stored firewood, requirement of eaves trough on all types of properties, and concern about anonymous complaints. So we've looked at those concerns and revised this bylaw to try to resolve those issues. So I'll just highlight some of the changes we've made. So under Section 4 of exterior property areas, we've removed the firewood, the neatly stored firewood portion. We also removed a section that was related to resodding or reseeding dead grass, so we've completely removed that. Another portion, this was in 4.4, it stated landscaping and general maintenance of exterior property areas shall not detract from the landscaping and general maintenance of the neighborhood. We've removed that as well. Under Section 21, under kitchen, we've removed the requirement to have a backsplash. And we've also removed the section, it's Section 30, where it would require all properties to have an eaves trough and roof gutters, so that's been eliminated as well. There was also an issue with rights of entry, where a property and a dwelling overlapped. So we added the word despite to clarify that we can't enter a dwelling without consent. We would never be doing that. So just to clarify that overlap there. We also added an exemption section. So this includes, this bylaw does not apply to lands on which construction is actively proceeding in accordance with a permit issued. And this bylaw also does not apply as to prevent a farm from meeting the definition of an agricultural operation under the Farming Act to carry out a normal farming practice. The new bylaw also includes the appeal process, which all property owners have the right to do. There was an appeal fee included in the 2020 user fee bylaw for this appeal. And then also with the complaint process, again, we don't take anonymous complaints. If anyone is filing a complaint, they have to provide all their information for us to start an investigation. So with that said, those were the updates we have, and that's about it.
Thank you, Blair.
Yeah,
Mr.
you're
Palmer.
welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the work you've put into this and how much you've listened to the concerns we've heard from the residents. That means a lot, because this is to reflect, our community and things. We want to make sure that what's in here are the things we actually are concerned about. I'm glad you've added some exemptions. That was a good thing. One concern I have is that the exemptions include agricultural operations, but it doesn't recognize, there's a lot of properties, we just had a presentation tonight, large natural areas. We still have a lot of pieces in this bylaw that speak to regulating natural processes, and I hope we can work to address those. I think, as I mentioned at a previous meeting, my overall goal here is to see this somewhat structured like a zoning bylaw, where there has provisions that apply to all properties, and then a subset of provisions that apply to meet those requirements of the province to the rental maintenance standards. And in such a manner, if we had it structured, issues like the backsplash would be appropriate to be in there under the rental maintenance standards, because those things are mentioned in the Residential Tenancies Act, the minimum maintenance standards that existed in the Residential Tenancies Act. So a lot of the issues that we heard at the public meeting regarding the interior provisions, when only applied to a rental situation, would make sense then, and all of the concerns that we heard here probably would be addressed. So I look forward to seeing what you come back with. I can certainly provide all my comments and concerns, my line by line and section by section comments to you offline to consider and bring back in another bylaw. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Goyda?
Thank you. I just wanted to start by saying there's definitely been a significant amount of really good work done to bring this bylaw up to date. It seems like a challenging document to get right, especially in Puslinch, because we have such a variety of different types of properties. We have rural, residential, agricultural, more urban type properties, subdivisions, as well as rental properties. And so I think the challenge is incorporating wording that is generic enough to be applicable to all those different types of properties, but specific enough to be enforceable. I think overall it's very good. There's a couple of areas that I have questions on, or maybe a little bit of a concern, and they are similar to those of Councillor Balmer. And the first one is the interior property standards. Our old bylaw didn't speak to interior property standards, and I fully understand that the intent of that is to cover enforcements of the interior standards as they're laid out in the Tenancy Act to protect renters. But the wording doesn't say in there that it doesn't apply to owner-occupied buildings. And I realize that bylaw enforcement is complaint-driven, and that it wouldn't really make sense that you file a complaint against yourself. But I guess my concern is if somebody had a falling out in the township of Puslinch and had a real bone to pick with someone else, their neighbor or another resident in the township, that they file a complaint that John Doe has cracked tile flooring throughout their house and a plywood countertop that's not impervious to grease or whatever. And maybe that sounds a little far-fetched, but stranger things have happened. And there's really nothing in the way that this is worded that would differentiate those two things. And so I don't know if it's possible to incorporate some kind of differentiation there. That would be my sort of comment or concern about that particular part. And the second is I think to what Councillor Balmer is speaking on naturalized areas. There's a definition in here of exterior property areas, and the way I interpret that is that the exterior property area is the entire property excluding the physical buildings. And we've applied that definition in Section 4 for the entire property to be free of excessive weeds and grass. And I definitely see the application of that in the township's hamlets and subdivisions and on roads where there's houses in close proximity to another. But in situations where someone might have a larger property who wants to naturalize part of the exterior area of their property and allow long grass and goldenrod or whatever to grow, this could be they could be challenged by the wording again in the bylaw. So the old bylaw, I believe, had some terminology in there that said a yard, which perhaps is somewhat open for interpretation as well. But I don't know if there's any way of defining excessive grass and weeds to exterior property areas to be more suitable to what would be a yard, I guess. And also maybe a little bit more clearly defining what would be considered excessive weeds and grass. And the last comment that I have is an issue that came up at the public meeting, and it's perhaps not so much a bylaw issue, but perhaps more a policy issue. And that was the current enforcement is complaint driven. And I fully understand that we do not have the resources, nor do we need to take on the resources to start searching for bylaw infractions. But it was brought up that in extreme circumstances, that enforcement is done on a proactive basis. And And, in extreme cases, I think that there can be impact on property value and just the general presentation of the township itself. And not everyone wants to complain. So I'm not sure if that could be incorporated somehow. I'm thinking it's not in the bylaw, but maybe a policy somehow, somewhere.
Yeah, I think that just for that last point, it is complaint-driven, but if we ever were to, whether it's town staff observe something that was an immediate safety issue, we would intervene at that point.
Okay.
But yeah, those are, rare cases, I guess. But yeah, we could.
Okay. Okay, that's good. Great.
And yeah, all the other points made, definitely good points and something to review for.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Spillis?
Yes, thank you very much for your work. Question, I went through this and I looked at the Guelph Hermosa bylaw. They seem to be very carbon copy of one another. Do you know if this is a standard blueprint across the province, across a lot of municipalities?
There's no standard blueprint. Every township and city has a little bit of a different property standards bylaw, but they're all to really achieve the same thing. But they do differ from town to town.
Okay. One of the things that came across in Guelph Hermosa bylaw was heritage attribution, heritage properties. I know we don't have any designated heritage properties. Perhaps that can be added in as well in here so that in case we ever do get it, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's done. I echo what both councillors Wilmer and Goyd have said with respect to the comments. We need something that's applicable to us. Seems more of a generic one that's applicable to a lot of areas, and we need to slice it and dice it to make it more apropos for us.
Councillor Bulmer, did you want to discuss your points so that Courtney could catch them in the minutes? Or would you'd rather do it offline? That's kind of putting you on the spot. I
Offline.
apologize. But the intent was for
For the
Courtney.
interest of time, I thought I'd send them to them separately. I could go on ad nauseum. We've touched on a few, but there are others.
Is there any key ones that you want to bring up? And then,
Well, I think, just to clarify, if we get it structured the way I'm looking at, all my concerns would be addressed, because then if it's structured so that the rentals only apply to the rentals and the all applies to all, as opposed to right now we're applying the rental to all. If we look at the Residential Tenancy Act, it included a number of very clearly what they applied to and what they didn't. It had clear exemptions and clear application guidelines. My concern overall is we brought those maintenance standards, but we didn't bring those clear exemptions and clear. They talk about from those they talk about bed and breakfast, hotels, all the different things that they do and don't apply to, and farms and natural areas. So you get a sense of what we're supposed to apply them to. And to Councillor Goyda's point, I think one of the things we need to look at as well, if you want to capture this in the minutes, is we need to understand what we believe a yard is. Our zoning bylaw lays out what an expectation of the minimum yard requirements are, and I think that's a reasonable place to start. That these are the places where we expect that minimum maintenance, is where we've defined in our zoning bylaw what the minimum yard requirements are. Beyond that, I think we can all acknowledge that's no longer yard, and something else has to apply. Either we don't want to be growing truck bodies and old cars in those areas, but we don't mind if there's grass growing there. So I'm going to put all those in writing to staff, and I'll let them sort through them and decide through their experience lens. So.
Sure, Mr. CEO.
So the report that you have before you needs to be amended, and it should read that the report ADM 2019-26 regarding the proposed property standards bylaw be received, and the input received from council be incorporated into the revised bylaw and brought forward at the next council meeting.
Perfect.
I have a question of our presenter. You and I chatted briefly about this issue of the yards, and can you just briefly explain what's done elsewhere in municipalities with respect to yard bylaws?
Yeah, so typically with yards, with long grass and weeds, if it's exceeding a foot in height, That's typically when you would issue an order to have it cut and cleared. Just to clarify, with naturalized areas, specifically here in Puslinch where there's large properties, forested areas, there would be no requirement to go in and start chopping all of that down. Some of this would apply more to subdivision kind of homes and the yards surrounding the house. But yeah, that, we don't have an exact like height limit in this.
You mentioned that there's a yard bylaw that other.
Oh, yes, yes. So other municipalities and towns have a clean yards bylaw that they'll take from this. So they'll take the clean yards portions from the property standards bylaw and create a clean yards bylaw. This kind of is effective for Milton, for example, which is a growing large municipality now, where you can deal with a lot of these clean yards issues quickly. The property standards bylaw, you have to give a property owner a minimum of 19 days to comply. So that's the minimum. So when it comes with whether it's garbage or waste or something like that, a clean yards bylaw allows you to quickly deal with it as opposed to wait almost a month.
So where I believe the concern lays is that, we might have 2-acre parcels side by side by side by side.
Yeah.
And then there might be one individual that only mows the minimum yard required in the planning, in the zoning, and then the rest of it is naturalized with ragweed, whatever it may be. So I believe council is looking for some clarification on that. What do we consider a yard? Are we going to align it with the zoning, or are we going to align it with the whole 2-acre parcel, even though it's not forested? So I'm going to ask of you to provide a couple options.
Sure, yeah.
Would maybe for us to, to discuss when you bring back the bylaw, would that capture what you're?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. All right. And I really thank you for your work on this. There was quite a full house the first time the bylaw was presented, and people were worried, and you've done a great job. It's slightly less full, so we're going in the right direction, so thank you very much. Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Sapoulos, that report ADM 2019-026 regarding the proposed property standards bylaw be received, and the input received should be incorporated into the revised bylaw and brought back for review at the next council meeting. All in favor? Oh, hold on, correction on that. It's not the next council meeting, a future council meeting. The next one's in December.
How about in the first quarter of 2020?
Future.
Future, just put future, and just know that we want it back soon.
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor?
Yeah, all in favor.
Gary. Thank you, Blair, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good work.
Great job. All right, so. Do we have any business arising of the minutes? No? Okay. Public meetings, none. Communications, let's go to the first one there. I just got to pull it up. All right. The first communication from the Ministry of Agricultural, Food and Rural Affairs. Any questions or comments? Okay. Next one is correspondence from MNRF. Any questions or comments? 3, correspondence from Halton Region to Premier Ford with respect to proposed changes to the provincial policy statement.
Oh, just the Halton Region comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is regarding the provincial policy statement. It's interesting. One of the concerns this community has had for a long time is that aggregate trumped food production. So prime ag to the ministry's ear meant prime aggregate, to us it meant prime agriculture. But now it also, outside the Greenbelt, the aggregate will trump natural heritage features. I know you mentioned this previously, but I'm glad to see that this group has raised that concern that heritage features are now, come secondary to aggregate. So now aggregate trumps food, air, and water, it seems, in terms of the provincial policy statement, which is discerning, which is concerning, at least. The other piece that was in here, or was in the PPS that they didn't mention, relates to the vertical zoning piece. I don't know if you noticed that they're talking about the vertical zoning it indicates that extraction depth, and the PPS now, when they're dealing with vertical zoning, that the dealing with extraction depth is, would be the purview of the ministry wherever the Aggregate Resources Act applies. This extends, this remains even after the license is retired. I don't know why they need to do the double whammy on that. I don't know. So even after it's zoned back into something, or after the license expired, the Aggregate Resources Act will still be applicable to that site. I don't know how that works. But nobody commented on it. I don't know if Tatmo is going to comment on it. It's an odd wording, and I don't know if Mr. CAO would be able to provide any insight into this. I just couldn't get my head around why it would still need to apply even after a license has been rescinded.
Well, there are a number of things in the draft legislation that are hard to understand and to see how they're implemented. And I think that's why they said that a lot of this is being left to regulations. And in our report that we brought forward a few weeks ago, that was one of our primary concerns, was to actually understand how this is going to be implemented. I did have a call into the Region of Halton to ask those same questions that you identified, and they just received the information a couple days ago. So their Commissioner of Planning knows the questions that we have and is going to be providing answers to us. So we'll get the benefit of their review as well.
Is that it?
Yes, thank you very much.
No problem.
It's an odd double coverage on their part.
Yeah, we're in a turbulent time with the aggregate industry right now, so it'll be interesting. I think that'll be a great idea for a delegation at Roma, is the MNRF, to ask for some clarifications on points exactly
Oh,
like
yeah.
that. So that's I just made a note of, so I'm trying to remember that. Any other questions or comments on number 3? No? Okay. Next one is the Halton Region Report for the Conservation Parks. Oh, no, it's not. Sorry. It is, correction. It's the LAS AMO Business Service correspondence. Any questions or comments on that one?
I'm just glad we're getting a rebate.
Okay. Then we have the correspondence from the City of Guelph. Any questions or comments? Nope. All right. And then this is the one that Jessica has the pecuniary interest declared. So we're going to go through these compliance reports. We'll just do them one by one quickly. Hopefully, I felt that was the most efficient way because they get blurred together. So we're on number 6, and the first one is Compliance Assessment Report, License ID 5654. Any questions or comments on that one?
Just a comment. They make a comment that the site has been rehabilitated to agricultural cropping with excellent results. And my question is, who makes the assessment? The same guy who prepares the site plans? That's a comment. I don't think that's a fair assessment.
I was speaking with a farmer 2 days ago that leases out a rehabilitated pit, and he says if it doesn't rain in August, nothing grows. And unfortunately, but if you get some rain, then it does get some yield off it, but it's definitely challenging for him. All right, any further comments on that one? How about Compliance Assessment Report, License ID 5610? Questions or comments? No. 5709. Compliance Assessment Report ID 15338. And then we'll just go to 624864.
I'm good for the rest of them.
Yeah, me too.
All right, that's
There's
perfect.
Nothing standing out.
Good. Yeah, they're pretty straightforward. All right, now we're on to correspondence number 7 from, welcome back, Jessica. Correspondence
you.
from AECom with respect to the City of Guelph. No, this is a different order, I think. Any questions or comments on that one?
Yeah, City of Guelph has invited us to two sets of types of meetings. The first one is a community liaison group, and the second one is a sort of a steering group meeting. I had a chat with our CAO, and I just wondering if you can just update us with respect to who we've appointed to the second meeting.
The second meeting being the technical meeting?
That's correct, yeah.
Our consultant who does our hydro-G work
Stan Good?
Yes, yes. We contacted him to see if he would be available to attend that meeting, and maybe Courtney can fill us in on whether that's been...
Yes, we contacted Stan from Hardin Environmental, and he is available to attend that meeting. I don't know if there was another council member that would be asked to attend with him, but Stan is available.
Is there any interest from any council member to attend that?
I think it's a technical meeting, and I think it's beyond the scope of most of our expertise.
I agree.
We might be interested, but what could we add? I don't know.
Yeah.
And the other one was a community liaison meeting, and I think that should be a resident of Puslinch who would have an interest in potentially a well being constructed in Puslinch, serving city of Guelph. I think this is what it leads to. They're doing a water supply master plan, and they're going to identify most likely a shortage, and guess where they can get the well in Puslinch. So I don't know if we want to suggest approaching a community member, or do we want to have somebody like one of us attend that?
That's a very good question. Do you have somebody in mind from the community? That you,
No, I don't.
I could go. I wouldn't mind.
yeah?
If that's, because I see that, things have changed now in the city, now that they've annexed the former Domtar site, and they're looking at establishing additional water takings there. It changes the whole game for the city of Guelph now that that's within the city. So it'd be an interesting piece to.
I'll do my best to attend with you, Councillor Bulmer.
If I can't attend, I belong to the Lake Erie Source Water Protection Committee, so we're sort of removed from that.
Well,
If I could ask Courtney to add that to my calendar, staff to.
Yes, I can for sure.
mine as well, please.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right, on to IG. So the first one is a letter from the Minister of Energy, Northern Development and Mines. Any questions or comments on that one? No. Second one is Mill Creek Pit License, 5738. Any questions or comments? Then we have the Enbridge Gas. Any questions or comments on that one? No. Notice of public hearing. Any questions or comments? No. Ontario Energy Board application. Any questions or comments? No. And then we have the Township of Sterling correspondence. Any questions or comments? No. West Elgin. None. And support of resolution of Town of the Blue Mountains. Questions or comments? And Town of Pettatanguishene. See none. Township of Schreiber, provincial budget cuts to Northern Libraries. Any questions or comments? No. Town of Kingsville letter. All right, nothing. All right. Gray Sable Conservation Area letter to Minister Yurk. See nothing. Township of Springwater. Any questions or comments? We have two from the Township of Springwater. They just love, everybody loves sending us this stuff. So Township of Ramara, how do you pronounce that? Any questions or comments? Town of Wasaga Beach. And then we have Town of Ingersoll, letter to Premier Ford. Councillor Bulmer.
Yes, thank you. This was a refresher. This one and the one from Sauble was nice. But this one in particular, this is a municipal council that understands how the system actually works, and I'm glad they put it in there amongst all these other resolutions. This one identifies that, these conservation authorities that other municipalities were complaining about are actually led by the municipalities within those conservation within the areas those authorities cover. And it was good to see that. If we have an issue with any of the conservation authorities that our levy goes to, we're the ones who appoint the representatives, and we can always speak to them if we have an issue with the direction. So it's good to be reminded that we actually can call on those representatives if we have a concern. Thank you.
Mr. CAO?
Just to that point, I think it's at the next council meeting where the CAO from Conservation Halton is presenting their budget, which I met with him this past week, and I gather they're recommending to their board a decrease in the levy for Puslinch, not an increase, a decrease. And he has been sort of leading the charge on behalf of a number of conservation authorities around the issue of core businesses and the importance of investing in natural areas for the benefit of residents. So there is a cost to that, but there's a huge benefit as well. So Hassan Bassett has, I think, been before your council a couple of times. So I'm sure he'll be speaking to that larger issue in terms of the government's attention on mandated and non-mandated sort of quote-unquote businesses. As well as delivering, I think, some good news on their budget.
Great, thank you.
All right, next one's the AMO watch file. There's two of them.
There's a lot of them, so.
Yeah.
I have comments on several of them, so first one is 724.
Yeah, I got some notes. I don't remember which one it's from, but
Okay. Councilor Spillis?
Yeah, 724. I noticed in the LAS municipal group buying program, I know that we as a township avail ourselves of those services, but I noticed in there they also do fire truck buying, bulk fire truck buying. So I was wondering if we can ask staff to approach LAS to see if they can come and give us a presentation on the full gamut, what they can provide to us in terms of bulk purchasing. Fire truck intrigues me. If we can get a 5% saving on a or 10% saving on a fire truck, that's a big dollars for us.
Comfortable with that? Do you have, on the same AMO correspondence, do you have comments, Councilor Bowman?
I had identified the cooperative purchasing piece. I didn't write down which one it was in, but that's the piece I wanted to discuss as well, so.
Do we need a motion for that direction to staff, or?
Direction to staff.
Okay, I move that we ask staff with respect to AMO Watch of October 24th, that they approach LAS and ask them to come and give a presentation to council with respect to their municipal group buying program. Especially fire trucks would be good.
Okay. Do we have a seconder for that? Councilor Bowman? Can we discuss that? Comfortable with that?
Oh, I'm comfortable with that.
That'd be great if we could save some money. All in favor? Okay. You want to just go it? We'll just keep going.
Okay, 725, AMO OMFP, I noticed that there's a reduction and spoke to staff, and we're actually getting a slight increase, so that was good news.
We're one of the few.
One of the few, yes.
Okay. Any other question or comments on that one? By any chance? No? Okay. If you got more, just.
Yeah, 726, again, there's a financial assistance. We're going to be asked what was the quantum, the financial assistance we received. I wonder if we can ask our financial officer to just reiterate what you told me.
Okay, so the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing has announced a new grant opportunity as it relates to the modernization funding. And so their first intake includes service reviews, grant funding for service reviews. As you all know, we are working with the County of Wellington and KPMG for the efficiency review currently. The second intake of the program includes implementing the recommendations that come out of the service review, and that intake will be announced in the spring or summer of 2020, and the township will plan to apply for that intake based on the results of the efficiency services review that we're currently undertaking.
Excellent.
And the other comment on that correspondence was that the voters list will be managed by Elections Ontario now, which is great.
Staff will be relieved. Yes, for sure. Okay. Any other questions or comments on 26? Okay. Do you have some on 27?
Yes, I do. There is a notice that the delegations to Roma due date is December the 2nd. So if we're having any delegations, we should discuss that and
Yeah, we should do
request
today.
that. So my suggestions would be the Aggregate Resources Act, the Morstan Bypass, and the transfer station.
Comfortable with that? Everybody comfortable with those two so far? Councillor Bowman, do you have any suggestions?
I like the Aggregate Resources Act. It also, you had had a brief discussion last time about the a levy from the water taking similar to Arrogate. This township had a committee looking into that years ago. It's something we've been looking into for a long time, and I'd like to, if we have an opportunity, I'd like to follow up with that too, just to give a broader perspective again on maybe to justify why, although I understand Hillsbury, they don't even get the revenue from having the plant there, but, and not just for water bottlers, but any large water takers, there is an additional cost that we have when we have to engage a hydrogeologist to peer review those reports every year, that it'd be nice to be able to have a levy that help cover that additional expense, whether regardless of what the plant is making, if they don't have a large water taking, we get the same assessment regardless of what they're making. But if they have a well with a large water taking permit, that's an additional cost that we have. And so I'd like to, revisit that with the province.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. CAO, but that's through MECP?
That's correct.
So we'll apply for delegation to MECP and MNRF, just for
Yeah.
MTO so far. Okay. Is there-
Yeah, I would agree with Councillor Balmer. I believe, Mayor Sealy, you had a delegation for that at the AMO conference.
Correct.
And there was some success in some dialogue back and forth afterwards.
Yeah.
And so
We're still working through that success. We're having
So-
some meetings. We have another one coming up this Friday, so.
I think it would be a good idea to just reinforce again that same topic.
Just follow it up.
I'd like to possibly have a delegation with the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, just speak of the challenges of growth in Puslinch and reiterate that we need growth on private wells and private services to sustain Puslinch into the future. And we could talk maybe about, some of the mapping still, they've kind of backtracked on it, but they haven't said where it's going to land. So I think it's important to get our information out as quickly as possible. So that would be my suggestion on top of those. You guys have any other ones? Okay, well, thanks for catching that, Councillor Sepulveda.
No problem.
Next one is, where were we at, 27? Yeah. So 28, do you have any comments? No. 29, any comments?
I'm not sure which number it was, but it related to the development charges, the changes, which I don't know what number that, have we
That's
passed that one?
29.
It's 29,
That we are now?
correct.
Yeah, I'm glad they talked about the community benefit charge, and I'm glad they're talking about one of my biggest concerns is that unlike the development charges, this, which was, prescribed by provincial legislation, these community benefit charges could be appealable by which would only further increase the cost of growth that, this just makes it more expensive for everybody if these things start getting appealed all the time. And that's why it was predictable, it was known before, and I'm glad they've identified this as a potential issue in this change.
Okay, thank you.
With respect to that, I was wondering if staff have an update with respect to the development, so the parkland dedication fees. Our big concern is retaining it.
Revenue neutral.
So we contacted AMO, the advisor on Bill 108, and they indicated that the calculation and the methodology still remains in development. And municipal representatives continue to provide feedback to the government. As you may recall, we were asked to do a survey a short while back to just indicate what our current practice is and how much we currently receive in cash in lieu of parkland. And AMO indicated that they would expect to see an EBR posting soon with the details about how it would be calculated under the proposed Bill 108.
Do you have any idea how soon?
They did not know at that time, no.
Thank you.
Were the new community benefit charges, were they not supposed to be implemented in January 2020, or was it 2021?
January 1st, 2021. That's what the draft bill indicated at the time.
Still have a year, okay. Thank you. Any further questions on that one? No. Okay, and we have one last one, number 30, for the email watch file. Nope. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Sepulveda, seconded by Councillor Goyda, that the intergovernmental affairs correspondence, items listed on the council agenda for November 20th, 2019, council meeting be received. All in favor? All right, reports. I'll invite Chief Gomes down. Right.
Yes.
Mayor and Council, thank you very much for allowing us to present to you today. There's two reports I'll speak to, and I'll start off with FIR Report 2019-10, and that's in regards to cost recovery services provided by Fire Marquee, that this report be accepted for information purposes only. The reason for this, as you know, we've been focusing our efforts on a lot of new funding opportunities for the township and the fire department specifically, and this aligns with that strategy that we have. So I'll just move forward with this report. We also recommend that council consider enacting a bylaw authorizing cost recovery fees with respect to fire department specific responses for services and supplies used by Puslinch Fire and Rescue at emergency events. We also ask that council consider amending the Township of Puslinch user fees and charges bylaw, specifically Schedule E that relates to fire service rates and charges to account for this new type of cost recovery. What we're looking at is when we go to structure fires, we don't really have a mechanism in place to recoup any of the costs associated with doing so. So beside me here is Chris Carrier. He represents Fire Marquee. Their company provides a service to help us recoup some of those costs through insurance companies. So through homeowner or property owner's insurance policy. So I'll let, if it's okay, Mr. Mayor, have Chris expand on that through a presentation he's prepared for council today.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. It's a privilege to be here. I'd like to compliment you on the relaxing atmosphere of your council meeting. I had the privilege to serve in the town of Collingwood from 1997 to 2010 for consecutive terms, 3 as a councillor and 1 as mayor. And I can assure you that this is not the norm across Ontario. So congratulations, it's quite nice. Firemark began its operations 10 years ago. We've just celebrated our 10th anniversary, and when I left politics, I chose to leave politics in 2010. I'd sold my private company, and I was looking for another thing to do, and I met the executives of this company at a political fundraiser in Toronto, and so they hired me to be their municipal liaison officer. And Firemark was created by a number of retired or semi-retired insurance executives who were looking for something to do in their retirement, and they were aware that this coverage existed. We started with 0 clients. We now have over 110 clients. We have 91 and growing in Ontario, and we're also in New Brunswick, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. Our largest client near to you would be the City of Kitchener. Our smallest client in Ontario would be the Village of Newberry with a population of 499 with a 5-member council as well. So 1% of their population is elected officials. There's 198 insurance companies operating in Canada, and because of Ontario's population, most of them are operating in Ontario. You'll see the top 20 there. You may have your personal property insured with one of those. My home in Collingwood, Ontario, is insured with Aviva, quite a large company and quite a good company as well. Almost all insurance policies for property-related policies, whether it's industrial, commercial, farm, residential, if it's a property policy, under the additional coverages section, we'll have something that identifies a fire department service charge. So the policyholder is paying for this coverage as part of their overall premium. In this policy, you'll see a $25,000 limit. But it also ranges down to $1,000 limit. So a lot of rural Ontario, you'll see farm policies where they have an extension of the house policy to cover the barn. However, this is the most dynamic part of the marketplace right now. Wawanesa has been very aggressive in increasing their coverages from $3,000 all the way to $10,000. But Intact, the largest property insurer in Canada, is buying up the farm mutuals, and their new policy wordings, which we have a copy of, indicate that the policy limits will cover to $25,000 on a farm. The legal definition, and this is essential in my communication with you and to your ratepayers that are here this evening, is that we invoice the insurance company on behalf of the municipal fire department. So I'm not sending an invoice to the policyholder and asking them to pay the invoice and get reimbursed by their insurer. We are dealing with the insurance adjuster for whichever of the 198 insurance companies that we're dealing with, and we're invoicing the insurance company, and the money comes back to us in trust. We ask that you amend your user fee bylaw, and I've provided a new bylaw. It's been drafted in the last 3 weeks by Templeman Law in Brockville, Ontario. Jennifer Savini is a municipal law specialist. She did that on behalf of one of our clients, and we actually paid for that. And so we said, since we're paying for it, we are going to recommend that new wording to all of our existing clients. So you are the second client that I presented the new bylaw to, but this is not the new bylaw, unfortunately, on the slide. Mulmer Township was the first one to see it in the slide format, but the chief does have the wording for that. But essentially, you need to have this in your fee bylaw because the insurance contract between the policyholder and the insurance company, while they do have the coverage there, it says here, you take a look at Allstate Elite Homeowner wording, we will reimburse you up to $5,000 when there's a requirement to pay. So the insurance industry has protected themselves within the contract language against the municipality going back in time up to 2 years on a large loss incident. So it's essentially from the date of amending your fee bylaw moving forward that you then can unlock that insurance contract to receive the funds that you're entitled to receive. And I would emphasize that the policyholder is not entitled to these funds, only the municipal fire service is. So if you don't get it, then the insurance company keeps it. I've gone through this with Louis and Brad, your chief and deputy chief. The standard incident report is what I would like a copy of. So you're already doing the bulk of the paperwork. I'm asking for a copy of that work. We have a database of over 1,600 policy wordings. We have a database of insurance professional contacts coast to coast to coast. We'll open up the file. We'll ask insurance adjuster A if so-and-so has opened up a claim against their policy. If the answer is yes, we piggyback on that claims process. If the answer is no, we close it. I've done the cost recovery projections, and it's also in the staff report for you to look at, and this is your share. The Municipal Act, I've done presentations to a number of AMCTO gatherings. I quite enjoy that, and especially with my past experience as an elected official, it's always fun to talk to the professional staff and see if I've got it right. I do have it right. The Municipal Act allows you to charge user fees, and it allows you to apply a test of reasonableness. Is it reasonable for a municipality to amend their fee bylaw in order to unlock an insurance contract that has the language that you're entitled to receive those funds, but it's written in such a way that you need to pass local legislation in order to get it. So of course it's reasonable for you to do that. It's deductible exclusionary, so the policyholder is not worried that they have to pay a portion of the fee. It's deductible exclusionary. And I get this question all the time. I pay taxes, and this is why I pay taxes. There are costs that are incurred when the trucks roll to the time the trucks come back. So the wages that you pay, the phone that you use, the water that you use if it's metered, anything that is defined as a consumable is subject to the loss that incurred at the property to the limits of the policy. So those expenses are recoverable. So it's not a fee for service, it's a cost recovery mechanism. Your rates will not go up as a result of this program. Listening to you, you're obviously, all of you are very good at math. If you're insuring your home and the value of the contents, then the value to replace that asset goes up every year. So when you see an increase, it's usually due to a cost of living increase. The fire service costs has usually remained static for 10 or 20 or 30 years. So the ratio says it's small compared to the overall risk exposure for the value of the asset and the contents. It's our position that for every $1,000 of coverage that you have, so if you have a policy with $1,000 coverage, you're paying between $1.90 and $3.40 for that coverage. I've analyzed my own policies, and the costs that are not identified with a premium amount, it's less than 2% of the total, and included in that is the fire department service charge. Hey, we told you how to do it. What do we need you for? It's not as collegial as you might think dealing with an insurance company. It's a little more adversarial. I'm glad some of you laughed. Clearly, you've had some experiences. It's a little more adversarial, and the people that are leading the claims recovery for our company are either retired or semi-retired insurance adjuster. So for Ontario, our lead team member is the president of our company with 35 years with Royal Insurance. He did $500 million a year in claims, and he used to audit the province of Ontario's claims as well. So we're bringing a substantive intellectual bank into this equation. This is an example of a large loss incident in Essa Township in 2014. I don't know if any of you know the former mayor of Essa Township, Terry Dowdle. He's now MP for Simcoe Grey with the Conservative Party of Canada, just recently elected. I was also a member of FCM board as well. So that property had a tornado, affected 103 properties. So most people would think that there might be 5 insurance companies, maybe 10 insurance companies. There was 41 different insurance companies dealing with those 103 properties, and most of them were in that subdivision. It took us 11 months to receive the files, which is fine. As a former elected official, you have your residents to deal with. They've had an emergency, and the last thing they want to do is fill out paperwork. That's what we do. But we waited 11 months, and then took us 10 months to recover all the expenses for Essa Township and the 4 neighboring departments that also incurred expenses, because all of those expenses were recoverable. And there's a letter of recommendation from former Mayor Terry Dowdle. And there's some of your colleagues across the province. And before I came here, I was actually dropping off some money on the way to your meeting today. So a number of fire chiefs were happy to see me, and I'm doing that again later this week and next week.
Excellent. Well, thank you for your presentation. Councillor Bulmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening. Welcome. No, it's a great program. It sounds like a great program. Just a couple of questions. Can you compare this? We've been doing this for a long time with motor vehicle. Have we not? Doing the cost recovery at the insurance companies?
That's correct. So we do that for motor vehicle collisions that happen within the township that do not involve residents of Puss Lynch.
Or just for non-residents?
That's correct.
Okay. And then, yes, I'm glad you talked about we could do it ourselves. And because when I looked at the presentation, I thought, okay, we don't get a lot of fires. We may not call them this much, but I was trying to get a sense of the 30%. That'd be 30% we don't get unless we did it compared to doing it ourselves. But there's a cost for us to do it ourselves, and I'm sorry I couldn't figure out from the report what was that in there that we'd still have to spend some staff time, even if we did it ourselves. We'd have to spend some money. So, do you have any comparison to what that would be?
I did not do a cost comparison, so right now my feelings are that we operate so leanly that it would be very difficult to incorporate this process. Also, as Chris mentioned, they do have the expertise to deal with these matters, and so for me, I feel like we would not be out of pocket, let's say, for these services. Basically, they recoup on a commission basis the funds that they can bring in for us, and I think that there's a lot of value to that because they will work very hard to do so on our behalf. So I think that's a good opportunity for us to not actually incur expenses and still bring in some cost recovery. Go ahead, Chris.
And just to emphasize, there's no annual, there is no minimum. It's strictly a cost recovery. So if we recover, you get 70% of the gross funds recovered, and then we retain 30% for ourselves, which 26.5% is ours, 3.5% goes to the federal government for GST.
No, it makes sense, and obviously, if we could have been doing it ourselves, we would have been doing it by now, right? And this is how I kind of came to understand it, so.
That's correct, and we did a lot of research looking into this. So I actually met Chris a couple years ago, and I've sat with the idea for a little bit and looked at some of the background as far as other municipalities utilizing this service. And within Wellington County, there are at least 4 that I'm aware of that utilize Fire Marquee for these services. And the fire management of these municipalities is very content with the quality of service that they're receiving by Fire Marquee. I don't know if I'm correct in this statement, but as far as I'm concerned, or from doing my research, Fire Marquee is the only company that provides this type of service in Ontario that I'm aware of.
And it's a no-risk venture, and I think it's great. I commend you for thinking of it and bringing it to us, so thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councilor Goya?
Thank you. I think that any opportunity where there's potential to recover costs, while at the same time not producing more work for our staff or costs to our constituents, then it makes a lot of sense. I was going to ask if there's any other municipalities in Wellington County that are currently using this program, but you answered that question. The only other question I have is this applicable only to residential property insurance, or would, like if there was a big commercial fire or something, would it be covered in that as well?
Yes, any property. So whether it's institutional, whether it is commercial, industrial, farm, or residential. That $25,000 policy that I identified could be a nice insurance company that has that limit for a residential, but it's likely to be a small commercial property as well. When I take a look at that fire that you had several years ago, that was a horse barn fire, it was the same, within a few weeks, there was a goat barn fire in Middlesex County. Middlesex County Middlesex Center is a client of ours, and so that coverage was only $1,000. The coverage on the horse barn fire, that tragic fire that you had here, 6 of those horses were individually insured, and the barn, even though it looked like a barn and smelled like a barn, it was built part for commercial, not part for agricultural. It was unlimited coverage. It was 100% recoverable.
Oh, Councilor.
You mentioned that residential and industrial properties or commercial properties are candidates for this. What about properties that have buildings under construction?
Likely no, but we would investigate, and if we determine no, then there's no cost to you because we didn't recover anything. If there is an opportunity to recover, then yes. So when you see a subdivision under, I think we've all seen the news where you've seen a subdivision that's been under construction and 6 or 7 houses may have burned. That's not likely recoverable, but we would investigate it.
And the last question, you mentioned the horse barn fire. Several other fire departments were called out to it as well. I understand Cambridge and Guelph. How would that work in this particular instance? We're on and with your program, but the other Cambridge and Guelph are not.
Because it occurred in your geographic area and it's your user fee bylaw, what we did with Essa Township, with the 4 neighboring departments that responded, 3, I think, of the neighboring departments were clients, or 2 were, and then one other one became one afterwards. We asked them to submit their standard incident report to us as well, and we put all of the costs together, and so they were all recoverable, and we returned them all to Essa Township. But it's because it occurred in your geographic area.
So the flip question is, what happens if we provide mutual assistance to an area that does not have this program?
So under mutual aid, you eat the cost. Under automatic aid, you may have a cost recovery. If you have a service agreement with your neighbors, then you have a cost recovery agreement as well. And we do have 3 clients that they don't have a fire department. They contract the service to their neighbors, so we actually get the standard incident report from their neighbor, and then we return it to our client.
Great, thank you.
Just a question for you. Do automobile policies have this cost payment component to them?
So no, your motor vehicle is done through regulation, and it may also be done through the liability section of the policy. Where property will come into play is if it's a car fire or a vehicle fire that occurred adjacent to a property, like a garage or inside the garage, or we've all seen those news stories again where people have gone to renew their license and they run into the building. So then it comes from the property policy. The property insurer may go after the driver's insurance, but that's behind the scenes and doesn't affect you at all and doesn't affect the recovery. But the recovery for the fire department may come from the property owner, not the vehicle.
The reason why I asked is we have incidents that happen on a provincial highway, Highway 6 South, and then all of this traffic gets detoured onto our roads, and then there's destruction to them. So we have these costs of our infrastructure, and there's no vehicle like this similarly to get some cost recovery back from the automobile insurance.
Unfortunately, Your Worship, no. However, if you did respond on the 401 series highway to an incident that involved, let's say, a tractor trailer that had cargo, there may be an extension of the cargo coverage has funds that are recoverable for the expenses. So your agreement with MTO does not cover your costs. It recovers a portion of your costs, and MTO then goes behind the scenes and does their things with all of the people that are involved. However, a number of our clients are along the 401 corridor, and they've asked us to investigate that, and we're pretty confident that there is, under the cargo carrying insurance, that there is recoverable funds there.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? All right. Moved by Councillor Swillis, seconded by Councillor Goyda, that report FIR 2019-010 regarding the cost recovery services provided by Fire Marquee Inc. be accepted for information purposes, and the council consider enacting a bylaw authorizing cost recovery fees with respect to fire department's specific response for services and supplies used by Postage Fire and Rescue Service at emergency events, Schedule A, sample bylaw, and the council consider amending the township postage user fees and charges bylaw, Schedule E, Fire and Rescue Service, municipal rates, and service charges to account for this new type of cost recovery. Any more comments before we vote? All in favor? Carried. Thank you very much. Great.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here this evening. Thank you.
You're still in the hot seat.
That's fine. Chris, appreciate it. You're welcome. Okay. So Mayor and Council, just before I move on to report 2019-11, I just would like to answer a question that was posed to me in regards to insurance for our residents that surround Puslinch Lake and receive fire protection from the city of Cambridge. So the question that was posed is, do these residents receive some type of insurance discount in regards to their policy because they are serviced by a full-time department versus a volunteer department or paid on-call department? So I did a little bit of investigating. I contacted my own insurance company, and they're a large insurance company. Their headquarters are out of Guelph. They stated that they do not provide a discount for full-time protection versus paid on-call or volunteer protection from fire services. I went a little bit further. We do have a staff member on Puslinch Fire and Service, or Puslinch Fire and Rescue Service, who's a broker, and he actually stated that he has about 50% of the residents there are his clients when it comes to insurance, which is quite a bit. I was a little shocked to hear that number. But I know he does quite well, which is good for him. And he elaborated on this a little bit too, and he said they do not provide a discount for full-time services versus paid on-call or volunteer services. And then he also expanded by saying some insurance companies might inflate their policy costs and then start adding discounts after the fact, where as the way he operates his business is, he does the best he can for the clients. They get the lowest rate possible, and these discounts don't come into play. So he said there might be the odd insurance company that might offer this, but they're inflating their costs at the front end to do so. So I hope that answers that question. Okay. Mr. Mayor, I'll move on to just speaking to report FIR 2019, number 11. And this is just in regards to just basically updating council on emergency responses by Puslinch Fire and Rescue in the first half of this year, so quarters 1 and 2. So the report I prepared is very similar to ones in the past. We did change our format a little bit to align with our standard incident reports that we provide to the province. So there's 9 different categories of calls, and if you want, after I can expand on these if you have any questions. So what I'd also like to mention is I added another column, and this is new to this report, and it's estimated total dollar value saved from fire. And I kind of looked at the report, and I always felt it was a little negative, so I wanted a positive spin to it. So this year we started recording, and it's a rough estimate on the dollar value saved from our fire services. And this is, we look at the rest of the structure that wasn't compromised by fire or smoke and the contents. And that value, by doing so, is quite large. And sometimes we get this number from the insurance companies as well. And it's over $5 million that we figure we probably saved in property loss with our services. The rest of the report speaks to training subject matter that we provided to our firefighters in the first 2 quarters of this year, and some of the fire prevention and public education activities that we attended and coordinated. So if there's any questions in regards to the report, I can answer them.
Chief, Councillor Bulmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for putting that in there. I don't know if you were around or heard me say before, where is the statue to the fire prevention officer? Because yes, this is the parts of the building that were saved because you had to go and prevented the fire from spreading, but there's also the fires that were prevented because of education that you and your staff had done years in advance. So this is the bare bones of the property that's been saved. So thank you for including it in your report.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for that comment. And just to expand on that, the fire service here in the province has what we call 3 lines of defense, and fire suppression services or operations is actually the 3rd line. So first is public education, which you spoke to. Second is fire prevention through inspections and code compliance. And then 3rd is last resort, is going out there and actually doing the work during emergencies. So I appreciate the comment. Thank you.
Councillor Guida?
Yeah, I was glad to see that that number in there as well. And I just want to again say thank you for all the public education that you do. I know that almost every public event that we go to here in the township of Puslinch, my kids really look forward to seeing that moving, talking fire hydrant that makes me stop, drop, and roll in front of everybody. But the only really question that I had was under the false fire calls, and in comparison to other calls, it makes up a pretty good chunk of that pie chart. And I'm just wondering, I have no reference point to know if that's a normal amount or a high amount, or as a comparison to similar sized municipalities, is that an acceptable amount of false calls to be having?
Honestly, I'd have to look at neighboring municipalities and their data to see if they're capturing their data and stats the same way we do, and then do a true comparison. However, as you know, through my full-time employer, I'm in the fire service as well there, and this is very common, or even more so, with full-time departments. And a lot of that, all of it basically is out of our control. So if an alarm's going off, whether or not it's a malfunction, somebody accidentally activated the alarm, or they just perceive that it's an emergency, we still have to attend.
Okay. And is there any cost recoveries for any of the false calls?
Yes, there is. So already in our fees and charges bylaw, there is a mechanism in place where if, let's say we got repeat offenders, we can charge them for our services for attending if they don't, let's say, alter their system to prevent these malfunctions from, or accidental activations from happening.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Suppose?
A couple of questions. First of all, on your semi-annual report, you have Q1 and Q2 for 2019, and for 2018 and 2017, they're the full year, I understand. How difficult will it be just to have comparable measures? In other words, if you're comparing Q1 and Q2, can we have Q1 and Q2 for 2018 and Q1, Q2 for 2017?
Yes, I could definitely do that, and thank you very much for pointing that out. So in my mind, when I prepared the report, I understood it, and it was easy for me to read, but I can see that basically to compare apples to apples, it does make sense to do so, and I will do so in the future. Thank you.
Great. The other question I had is similar vein as Councillor Goyda. The calls canceled en route and incidents not found, is there any way of controlling those? Like they make up a fair chunk of that, your category 9, and it's something that basically you spend a manpower to do unproductive work.
Yeah, that's a very good observation. And canceled en route, the majority of those calls were canceled because another emergency agency has arrived on scene already, and they take charge of that scene. So let's say it's a motor vehicle collision, OPP is in charge of that scene, even if fire arrives. So if they arrive on that scene first and they deem that fire is not required, then they cancel us, and we have to abide by their request. Same with medical responses. If EMS is first on scene, they do an assessment of the patient, realize that they do not require fire services for patient care or to mediate anything else in the environment, then they go ahead and cancel fire services, and that prevents us from attending, because if they ask us not to attend, they are in charge of that scene, so then we just come back to the hall. Also, if I could speak to incidents not found, code number 97. So what we've done there is we found the majority of incidents not found happen on the 401. And once again, this is due to people calling in on their cell phones and not realizing where they are exactly. And we do have a lot of commuters going through the township of Puslinch, and I do understand that they're going through in a high speed, and a lot of them probably don't even know they're going through Puslinch. They go from Cambridge to Milton and don't even know what's in between. So to assist with this problem, myself and Deputy Chief Churchill had a meeting with MPP Ted Arnott in the summer, and we expressed quite a few concerns that we feel the province could assist us with. Actually, we brought forth 6 of our concerns. One of them was being to have mile markers reinstated on the 401, and we feel that that would help in regards to incidents not found, that hopefully someone is paying attention, consciously or not, to the numbers that they're seeing, or it happens in front of one of these signs, so when they do call it in, they can identify exactly where they are. So we did receive follow-up from that. So MPP Arnott it was a great meeting. He did push most of our recommendations forward. We received correspondence back from the Ministry of Transportation, Mulrooney, who stated that she was in favor of reinstating mile markers on the 401, specifically in our area, and we look forward to seeing that happen.
That's great. I'd like to thank you for all the good work you're doing. You're certainly raising the bar here, and keep on.
Thank you.
Talking.
I echo those
Keep on
statements.
trekking. Fire trekking, yeah.
Yourself and Deputy Chief Churchill are doing excellent work for us, and your efforts to find, funding through different means. That's great. Just a quick question here about the canceled calls. We could maybe develop a policy for MVCs, motor vehicle collisions, to continue to those scenes, because if it's a non-resident, there's a cost recovery option there, because we've incurred those costs, right? Or is it similar to the MTO where you have to be on scene for a certain amount of time?
I can investigate that further. I think one of the concerns that came to mind right away is that if we do not provide a billable service, or basically supply any consumable items to provide a service, then we can't really justify a cost recovery. So if they deem that fire is not required on scene, then I'm assuming that there probably will not be billable services provided by our fire department. But I can investigate that further for you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Great job.
Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Spillis, that report FIR 2019-011 with respect to Puslinch Fire and Rescue Service emergency response update be received for information. All in favor? Carried. All right, the Finance Department, correct?
Will the chief be around for the emergency management report as well?
That's a good question. Ask the chief.
Mr. Mayor and Councillor Bowman, yes, I'll remain for that, just in case there are any questions that you'd like to direct my way.
Okay. Finance.
So these are just cancellation, reductions, or refund of taxes based on Section 357 and 358 of the Municipal Act. So if there's any specific questions on any of them.
Any specific questions on these? No? Okay. Moved by Councillor Spillis, seconded by Councillor Goyda. The council hereby authorize the applications for cancellation, reduction, or refund of taxes, Chapter 25, Section 357 or 358 of the Municipal Act, 2001 as follows. 2018, application 0419. Do I have to read all these out, Mr.? No, thank you.
Yeah, as noted in the report.
As noted. Perfect. All in favor? Carried. That was going to be a lot of reading. Okay, thank you. All right. Pardon me? Yes, I'll invite Linda down now for these next three reports, if that's okay. Welcome.
Thank you, Mayor Sealy and members of council. It's good to be here. So before you, I have emergency management program report, and then there's a couple of attachments with it. Just for reference, this is an annual report that I bring forward to councils every year about this time. It is summarizing the requirements under the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act regulations that municipalities are required to comply with annually. And so I've just lay out those requirements and how the township has met those. And for the township of Puslinch, I can indicate that we have met the requirements, and after tonight, I'll be completing our documentation for the township. Just a couple of highlights. Training. Control group. Every municipality is required to have an emergency management control group, and that would be the group that would come together to make more high-level strategic decisions with respect to municipal matters, such as if there's tornadoes or other events. And we completed our training with respect to that. You can also note that there were a couple of other additional trainings that aren't under the regulations, but they were provided this year as well with respect to training scribes to take information for members of the control group while they're operating. And then, of course, our crisis communication workshop for spokespersons, which tend to be heads of councils and alternates, as well as emergency information officers. And then we had our annual emergency management exercise, and the after-action report is attached for that. It was actually a twofold exercise this year. We had a field exercise in which the fire department was very instrumental in working with an industry in the township, and then we used that particular exercise and spin it off into the control group exercise. And I think there was a lot of value in learning in that exercise, as well as recommendations. And the only other thing is, I'm kind of highlighting these because I always classify these as the big three in terms of our emergency management programs. And the last one would be public education. And you can see we have a number of things that we do throughout the year in terms of public education. Something that was new this year that Heather started was the Do One Thing, which is focusing targeted information on a monthly basis and taking each month and looking at it and targeting information with respect to that. And from all accounts, I think that has worked well this year, and it may be something that we will continue with in the future. So other than that, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Councillor Bulmer.
Thank you very much. No, nothing on this. It's the after-incident report that it was most fascinating, but you'll be around for that too, I expect, eh?
Well, we can talk, she's here now. Is she?
Oh, I didn't know if you want to talk about the, because they're listed two separate items here, the annual report and the after-incident report.
So you have your question on the after-incident report? Do it now.
Yeah, okay, sure. In the annual exercise after-incident report, it was apparently a simulation of an ammonia leak and fire at the DB Shankar?
Yep.
Maple Leaf Foods place?
Yep.
It's interesting, it wasn't too long after that place went up, someone asked me, why does that building have windsocks on it, right? And I didn't know, so I had to ask, and apparently because of the ammonia in case of a leak. So it'd be interesting, when you were doing this exercise, ammonia, I've read about it in the newspapers here in the news before, when you get, they use it at hockey rinks and stuff, and when you get a leak inside people, it's fatal. But if this is a leak outside, how dangerous is it to people immediately around the outside of the building? Does it create a hazard broadly or just around the building?
I think I will defer that to the fire department, only from the perspective that as part of the exercise, so they went through the exercise, and the fire department actually went through the motions of contacting an organization, a federal organization, it's called CANUTEC, in terms of looking at multitude of chemicals and what the public safety requirements should be for that.
Okay.
So, Louis, can I maybe defer?
Might as well just stay there until we're done with these two reports. Thank you, Chief.
You're welcome. So Councillor Bulmer, to speak to that, the ammonia that's used at DB Shankar, which operates the facility, oops, not good, and and Maple Leaf Foods, who is the tenant, it's the ammonia's UN number 1005, and they carry 15,000 pounds, or store 15,000 pounds of ammonia on site. With that, if there is a release, our immediate response is to either evacuate or shelter in place anyone within 1.6 kilometers of that facility. After that, we can look at other factors or conditions that might impact that area. And then, as Linda mentioned, we can utilize a service called CANUTEC, or an emergency response guide that gives us more information. And then that information will give us isolation zones in regards to whether or not this happened during the day or at night, what the weather conditions are like, and that will assist us in determining different perimeters.
Wow. So 1.6, here I was thinking it might be a cloud around the building. We're talking 1.6 kilometers. Is that due to the speed at which a cloud, I guess it depends on wind speed and everything, so it could create a cloud that travels that far. Is this, oh man.
I can expand on that if you like.
Prepared for 1.6, so I'm trying to think, so the time, is it because of the time lag between, if there was a leak before the time it was detected and you guys were aware of it, and then that's how far it would travel by the time you were able to tell people?
That's how far it could travel, for sure. Also, what they do, what we found out, what they do have in place is certain emergency measures as far as shut-off valves. go. So hopefully the release is limited to a very small amount. So 1.6 kilometers might not be realistic, depending on the amount of release. But our scenario basically encompassed a structure fire and a full ammonia release because of that. So definitely the perimeter of first isolation would be 1.6 kilometers that we'd be looking at. And it would take some time to do so. That being said, the weather conditions, if it's dry and a little windy, then this is going to dissipate a lot faster. However, if, let's say, it's cloudy, and there's moisture in the air, then this can actually turn into a liquid, which becomes corrosive. So then there's another factor. So inhalation is the first factor, if this gas escapes into the atmosphere. But second is if it reacts with water and then it falls back down to the ground, it becomes corrosive. So there's a lot of different considerations when it does come to this.
Making me think of trench warfare all of a sudden. Have we identified this risk on our zoning bylaw or any place that people can be aware? I guess we know who's in that area, but do the people in that area know they're in that area?
They could if they did some further investigation. We don't go out and promote that. However, we do have a HIRA where we categorize the risks of different types of emergencies that could happen in regards to emergency management and the measures that we would take. And maybe I'll ask Linda to just speak on that a little bit further.
Mr. Mayor, through you. I think in terms of looking at this, one of the things that came out of this exercise, being involved in both the field and the control group, is that we did look at this about 4 years ago, just shortly after the industry was operational in the township. And there was a lot of concerns, very similar to what I think you're speaking to tonight, Councillor Bulmer. What I have found with this exercise and working with the industry, and as Chief Gomes has spoken to, the opportunity to tour it, to work with the staff, to see what mitigation measures, and that's a big part of emergency management, is looking at, can we prevent the risk or can we mitigate the risk? And I think there's a lot of mitigation measures in place. We like to take the worst case possible scenario when we're doing emergency management, and that's what we did in this case. Would this probably happen? Very, 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 very unlikely, but we looked at it as an extreme case and the consequences and how we would have to respond to that. But there's a comfort level in my view after this is the relationship building and working together, and that's huge in terms of emergency management. So.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. That's why the comments I made earlier regarding prevention is so pertinent to this. But I'm thinking of, as we start to want to, you heard the mayor talking about growth and maybe rounding out the hamlet. There's obviously going to be some. This would not be an appropriate place to add additional homes next to then, with this kind of a risk. This, if I understand correctly.
So, Mr. Mayor, if I may, and I'm technically considered under the planning department, and I still have my MCIP and my RPP, but being a planner and now doing emergency management, I think one of the things that we tend to overlook in terms of placing industry and residents together, we tend to look at the things like the air, noise, dust, odors, all of that. And there really isn't anything in terms of chemicals. So I tend to look at new businesses like this from an emergency management perspective. I do get circulated on them, and what I tend to do is try to look at it from that application, what's on site, speaking with the fire departments and others, what is the level of risk that might, and then if I feel there is something significant, I will provide comments to the municipality on that to consider.
I appreciate that, especially in light, the aquatic chemical fire at the south end of Guelph, that was a challenge, and that was a well-mitigated site as well, I'm sure. So I appreciate it that everybody's taking comfort in the place is well mitigated, and but it's still, I must admit, you could probably tell my response was a little bit, I wasn't prepared for that. Anyhow, thank you very much for your answers.
Thank you. Councilor Gordon?
Thank you. I don't really have any questions, but I did have the opportunity to participate in the emergency exercise, and I thought it was incredibly valuable. I just wanted to say a couple things that stood out for me. Firstly, over the course of the year, we've attended multiple workshops, trainings, all kinds of, I guess, seminar-based training. But until those things needed to actually be applied in a sort of real-life setting, none of I kind of had a deer in the headlights kind of sense. What are we doing here? So now that we've done that exercise and we've had the opportunity to go through it, I feel much more confident in how that control group functions and what the roles are of everybody, and so I think that was an incredibly valuable exercise to go through. The second thing that really stood out for me is I perhaps didn't realize until we did that exercise how many different agencies participate and how fortunate we are to have the wealth of experience of members of the county, members of the paramedic, of fire, all different fire internal staff, so many different people coming together. And I think that knowledge and that experience makes a huge difference in how that emergency is handled. So those were really great things to see. And the last is I just wanted to thank Deputy Chief Brad Churchill for sort of taking the bull by the horns when we started that exercise and sort of guiding the discussion in the right direction. So thank you for doing that.
Councillor Spillis?
No, I don't have any specific questions. I just applaud you on doing a good work and keeping up the good work and keeping us out of trouble legislatively.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. Your knowledge in emergency management is second to none, and I really appreciate all the work you do. I wasn't arrogant, but I thought, I work in emergency services. I'll get this, no problem. And again, thank you, Deputy Chief Churchill, for taking the lead, because I was a little bit deer in the headlights too. I'd never operated at that level, and it was very valuable to myself and rewarding to see everybody sitting at the table and just quickly offering what their agencies can bring to the table and working together. And even though it was just a scenario, it was excellent. So thank you very much. Council, if there's any further questions on the two items, we're going to leave you, Linda, here just to talk about the green legacy or the green signs, and I'll just pass these motions. So, moved by Councillor Spillis, seconded by Councillor Goyda. The council accepts the annual status report on the township's emergency management program for 2019. All in favor? Okay, that one's carried. And then moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Spillis, that the 2019 Township of Puslinch annual exercise after action reports be received for information. All in favor? Carried. Okay, and I think your last one is the rural green property addressing.
So the purpose of this was just to provide it to council for information, and I understand that there may be a few questions. The impetus for the report, one of the municipalities in Wellington, and I think it's Mapleton is indicated in the report, took some initiative and wanted to look at opportunities to include the street name on the green signs. They do have a municipality in close proximity that has the green signs with the names on it. Being rural and the fact that they have concessions and side roads and the numbering system in Wellington is not a unique number. So the number that's at the end of the driveway is not unique. It is based on a unique municipal address, being your property number, your street name, and your municipality. So they thought having that would help as more and more people, cell phones, traveling, having the name, much like the mile markers on the provincial highways would be helpful. So the Green Sign Project back in the 90s was a county project in terms of bringing rural addressing to all of Wellington County municipalities in order to implement the services of 911. We needed to have civic addresses to provide that enhanced service. So in doing it, to me, it was looking at it. We've talked to all the fire chiefs as well. There's an interest across the county from a fire emergency response perspective that having that would be helpful. So we brought this report forward to council with the suggestion that we look at funding the costs to replace the green the green signs. Still some questions because it's been raised at various municipalities, so I'll just raise it here. How far do we go? Do we go just the rural areas? Do we go into urban areas? Because some municipalities have chosen to put green signs in urban areas. Those are discussions I think we need to have if county council decides to move forward with this project next year.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bulmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm glad you compared it to mile markers, not just because of us, we already discussed it tonight, but that is actually how those numbers essentially work, and that's why they're not always unique, because they go down as you go across from east to west and north to south. So I thought it was a very pragmatic and practical system when it's brought in. Mind you, I didn't like it myself. I like not having my name on my mailbox and no number and no street name on a gravel road where no one could find me. That was just fine with me until I had a fire. But yeah, I think this makes sense. I understand why places like far more rural than us would need it and would benefit from it. And I could also see how in the more built-up areas, such as Aberfoyle and Morrison, where we have street signs more often, we may not need that on every green sign. So I'm glad the county's open to all the different variations, that it doesn't necessarily have to be one size fits all across the county, and it can be adapted to urban and rural areas. So thank you for bringing it to us.
Councillor Goyda?
Thank you. The only real question I have is in this report under the cost allocation options, there's sort of 3 different options outlined there. And it's option number 1, where it says the county budgets for the cost to replace all green property signs at a cost of $270,000. Member municipal staff would assist with the replacement of the signs in each municipality. And I'm just wondering if you can clarify what that means, member municipal staff would assist.
So the intent is that we would fund the cost to replace the signs, but the installation of the signs, we would need support through your municipal staff, whether it's fire department, public works, et cetera, to help do that. Very similar to what we did when we did the initial run of the green signs. And I have been asked as to what that would cost, and at this point, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how long it would take. We didn't keep track of how long it took us to install them initially, but mind you, we were installing the posts plus the green signs at that point in time. The intent is to just put them right back on, take them off the S-hook and put them back on.
Okay. So the way that this is being written is it wouldn't actually cost the township any money other than the staff's time to physically change them over. Okay.
That's the intent, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you mentioned this report hasn't gone to council yet, is that correct?
The report that you have in front of you has gone to county council.
Okay.
And there is support to include the figure. We've actually put right now a figure of $300,000 in the capital budget. The number that you have in the report is strictly rural, the total 4 digits. We have some urban areas that have 3 digits, so we have to account for those as well. Okay. But the report has gone support to include it in the capital budget for 2020.
And it's the option that's in your recommendation?
Yes, it is, yes.
Great, thank you.
No comments? Thank you very much. Moved by Councillor Sepulveda, seconded by Councillor Goyda, that the County of Wellington report on rural green property addressing signage be received. Carried. Thank you very much. And we have none. Roads and parks, anything new? Mr. Fowler?
Nope. We're good.
We got roads and parks, we got the roads.
Oh, sorry. Yes. We'll invite Sue down to talk about Roads Road. Sorry, I missed that. Welcome. Whenever you're ready.
Good evening, Mayor Seeley and members of council. My name is Sue Dason, and I'm legal counsel to the township in this matter of roads around Puslinch Lake. I'm guessing that, Mr. CEO, that you would like me to speak to this paper, to the staff paper So this is a staff paper that was put forward before you, which arose from a resolution that council passed some time ago, asking for staff to determine whether the roads around Puslinch Lake were private or publicly owned. And I was tasked with doing a title search for the roads around Puslinch Lake. To make it easy for you, there is an attachment to that paper, attachment C, which sets out all the roads. I have a big box in my car which supports this very simple chart that's before you. And only 2 roads have been identified as public in terms of the township owning the roads. One is Rhodes Road, and the other one is Traveled Road. And other than that, all the roads seem to be private. On Rhodes Road, which I think was the one of particular interest to council, it is, although it is owned by Puslinch on the pin search in title, the roads have not been assumed by Puslinch, and pursuant to the Municipal Act, unless a road within a subdivision is assumed by the township, there are no maintenance obligations. So those roads remain private roads. I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Councillor Bulmer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome.
Thank you.
You've certainly eliminated a lot of work in the future for, these issues go on. I mean, it seems almost every other year a question comes up about who owns a road around the lake. So thank you so much for putting the time in to take that on and solve that puzzle. But if I understand you correctly, then the situation we're now in is we're now in a situation where it's publicly owned and we're not required to provide maintenance, but if we passed a bylaw to assume it, if we wanted to, we could assume it and provide that maintenance then. It'd be up to us.
That's correct.
Okay. That's a more difficult position than the alternative, which is it's not ours, we don't have to worry about it.
Yes.
I appreciate. So then, the report also mentioned that the road, if we made that decision to assume it, there'd be some obligations to bring it up to a municipal standard then as well, or can you assume a road and maintain it at the existing standard?
I think the question that needs to be addressed is when and how does the township go about assuming a road?
Okay.
And then, once the road is assumed, then you would have to maintain it. So at this point, I understand that the township does not have a process for assuming roads. And the process would include exactly what you said. Would you need to bring the roads up to standards? What standards? What are the baselines? And then the paperwork done to assume it, and then it's yours to maintain.
Right, and if I understand again from your report, the width of the road that we own is wider than the traveled portion, but I couldn't tell, but is it wide enough to meet our typical, standard that we would want to bring a township road up to? Is the amount is the width that we own wide enough to do our typical township road?
So I'm going to comment on this as a lawyer and a non-technical person. My searches show that the roads are 66 feet wide.
Okay.
But having said that, I don't know whether on the ground it actually is today 66 feet wide.
Good, yes.
And what levels are needed to bring that up to, and what is the standard? I cannot speak to that at this point.
That's a brilliant answer. It's almost as if you've walked around the lake several times, because that has been the issue on all of these, whether they're private or publicly owned, is the encroachments that have occurred over time. We've had the same thing in Morriston, on Back Street in Morriston, to realign properties that have been lived on, built on over time, there can be encroachments. So that would be part of the process of would you say there was assuming the road?
Of assuming the road.
To then would have to be ground proof to determine what level of encroachments have occurred over the time as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for coming tonight. I'm trying to get an understanding of how we kind of got to where we are. And if I'm correct, would it make sense, tell me if my train of thought is correct, way back when the plan of subdivision would have been approved for this road, the developer at that time would have constructed the road. And the road, whether on purpose or not, was not built to the minimum road standard and was therefore never assumed by the township. Does that make sense?
Not exactly, if I may just go back a little bit. So basically is, developers develop and they set up what are called plans of subdivision. And then those plans get registered, and those plans have all the housing marked out and all the roads marked out. And then we have the Municipal Act saying that all roads within a plan of subdivision are owned generally by the municipalities, but it doesn't mean that the minute that the roads, no, they're not owned. All roads within plans for subdivision are to be maintained, are to be, they are roads. They may or may not belong to the municipality, but they do not automatically mean that the municipality have to maintain those roads unless the municipality actually looks at the roads and says, fine, I think I want to take this over.
Okay.
And then it becomes your maintenance is to be maintained by you. But if it is not in a municipality and it is roads outside, if it's not within a plan of subdivision and there are roads, those roads are to be maintained by municipalities. That's the main thinking of the Municipal Act.
Okay. So effectively, this road, although it's owned by the township, it operates as though it were a private road.
Yes, and in this...
Can I interject for
yes.
a second?
Yeah.
My understanding is we own the land
Yes.
that the
Yes.
road
That's
is
what I'm
on.
beginning to understand,
So
too.
there's a bit of a terminology there. We don't own the road. We own the land, and then there's been a road put on it.
Okay.
So just, it's a bit wordsmithing, but. just-
Okay.
Very clever.
And, yeah.
Okay.
But it is a road within a plan of subdivision. But in this particular case, for Rhodes Road, what's interesting is that there are two agreements that are registered on title in the old land registry system, which in one of the agreements in 1980, the township, together with a whole group of owners, agreed that the owners would pay a certain amount of money, bring the road up to standard, and then the municipality would take it over. The township would take it over. And then in 1992, another agreement was done which said, fine, scrap that 1980 agreement. We don't have to pay anything. You don't have to do anything. And this road will be maintained as a private road. So...
It's the climate. The climate has changed over the years, right?
Yeah.
At one point, they wanted
Yeah.
a public road, and then it went back to a private.
Yeah.
But you said that agreement is registered on title, so anyone purchasing a property on that road would be made aware of that agreement before they closed on a property.
If they had a good lawyer and
If they did a
didn't,
title search.
just use title insurance as the way of protecting themselves. But most
Yeah.
people should, especially on cottage-type properties, do the homework, search the title, find out what the encumbrances are, and find out what the arrangements are. And if I could, this is not unusual
Yeah.
in cottage country.
Yeah, and a normal person today buying this piece of land, buying a property next to Rhodes Road, may not know all of this because it is all under the land registry system. They buy the property, they look at the pin looks fine. If somebody actually bothered to go and actually pull Rhodes Road pin, they will see, oh, it's owned by the Township of Puslinch, and they can make their own assumptions if they want to. As long as they have access out of their house, nobody goes beyond that to look whether the road's private or public or, who's maintaining it.
So if the township were to consider, or let's just say they wanted to assume that road, before the township would be able to assume the road, it would first need to come up to minimum maintenance standards for roads
Yes.
before we would be able to assume that road.
Do you want to answer that, Mr. CEO, or shall I answer that?
I wanted all council to have a chance to ask questions to Sue first, and then Mr. CEO is going to speak about the process
Okay.
of assuming a private road.
Okay. Then that's all the questions I have. Thanks.
Yeah, I had a discussion with our CEO on this as well, and I'm glad you answered the question with respect to instruments. So I don't know if I was going to ask the CEO exactly, I think, what you're going to ask him.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
I'll let the Mr. CEO speak of
So,
what the process could be to assume a road.
yeah, so the Lynn, and as well as our solicitor Sue, searched the title, found the two agreements. So the last agreement that applies to the road essentially was, just as Sue described, the township had entered into an agreement with the property owners at the time, registered on the title of the property saying that this will be a private road. They didn't want to bring the road up to a particular standard, and they wanted it to remain private. When you drive down that road now, you'll see a big sign that says private road. This issue is not uncommon in cottage country. So I spent a good part of my career working in cottage country, and and as part of Sue's research, found a number of other municipalities that have wording in their official plan, which is sort of like a recipe or a process to have a road assumed for maintenance purposes by a municipality. And essentially, those policies in the OP in cottage country go something like this. The first thing that has to be done is a survey, to the point that Councillor Bulmer made, because in many cases, the travel portion of the road may or may not actually be on the road allowance. So you have to find out, that's the first step. Second step then, once the survey is complete, is an assessment has to be done to find out what it would take to bring the road up to a municipal standard. Because once it is up to a municipal standard, there's liability that goes with that. The municipality has to plow the road, ensure it's constructed to a certain standard, and then you meet the minimum maintenance standards the province has for roads. Typically, the costs of bringing it up to that standard are borne by the benefiting property owners. So they would, a survey would be done, an engineering assessment would be done, identifying what it would take to bring it up to municipal standard. There would need to be typically a cul-de-sac required for the snowplow to turn around to come out. And once that is done, then the agreement is entered into and a bylaw is passed to assume the road as part of the municipal infrastructure for purposes of maintenance purposes. So, and that's generally the way it works in most other municipalities that are in cottage type situations. So it's not that this couldn't be done, it could be done, but the two things would have to happen. There's an agreement already on title saying this is not going to happen, so the parties would have to agree that there's going to be a change. And the second piece would be the road would have to be brought up to a standard. A bylaw would be passed assuming the ownership of the road, because ownership of municipal roads, and there's lots of case law on this, is a deed plus maintenance. So if you have the deed to the property and the road is up to a particular standard and the municipality is maintaining that road, then it's yours and you have the liability to maintain that road to a municipal standard.
Okay. Councillor Bulmer.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. CEO. Remarkably, what you just described is sort of the typical process for any road in any plan of subdivision today or yesterday. This one
Correct.
happens to be, it never got finished, and therefore it remained private.
That's essentially what has
process,
happened
yeah,
here,
okay.
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Guida.
Oh, I don't have any other questions.
Mr. CEO, you mentioned a bylaw. Are you suggesting that in order to crystallize this, we should put forward a bylaw?
No. When I mentioned bylaw, once the work is complete, then a bylaw would be passed, which would bring this into the municipal infrastructure portfolio. What I was referring to was policy. So again, in many official plans, and Sue found an example of one in her research. There are policies in the official plan that deal with precisely the situation. And you find those policies in official plans in cottage country, essentially. That's really where you find them. And again, it's a recipe. It's a set of policies that are in place so that when you're confronted with a situation like this, you refer back to the policy. Right now, we don't have a policy. I don't know if it's in the county official plan or not. I haven't looked that closely. But in order to do that policy, you'd have to develop it and put it either into your OP or into your road standards or some other place.
So where we're at is we need to develop a policy on how we assume.
Correct.
Then we can go to the constituents and say, this is our requirement. So that's where I believe we're at right now, is we need to determine, and there is the option, and I might be wrong, but there is the option of assuming it as is. I don't think that's a favorable option, because we don't know where it is on the road allowance. You can do that. It's not ideal. However, I believe where we should go now as a council is develop that policy. And Councillor Moore.
Yeah, and I think we have the county is updating its official plan. It's a perfect time to have that addressed. And, you know, when I think back at the subdivisions that were developed here, that was one of the final stages. We, you know, when the engineers would go out and look and say, okay, it's time to assume the road. Mm-hmm. But up until that point, they were considered, you know, belonged to the land. They may have been our property, but they weren't our roads. They were still the responsibility of the developer to maintain until we assumed them at the end of the process.
If I could, one final point. You often will see signs. So a new subdivision will go in, and then you'll see a sign that says, well, there's probably two signs. One from the school board saying, we don't have any place for your kids to go to school. Warning, warning. And the second is, this is an unassumed municipal road. So the developer constructs the road, puts one lift of asphalt on. There'll be a period of time for checking for settling, and the second lift of asphalt's put on. But there's a warning sign or a sign that's right as you enter a subdivision. Once all of the work is complete and the engineers sign off on the fact that it meets standard, then a bylaw is passed. So that road could be there, the homes could be there for 2 years, but there still will be that big sign as you enter into the subdivision, and that says this essentially is not a public road. It has not been assumed by the municipality because they're waiting for a second lift of asphalt or a maintenance or warranty period to be completed by the contractor. Once it's done, bylaw is passed, the sign is removed, and it's a public road.
And then there is no restrictions from anybody in the public from traveling that road.
Correct.
Okay, so I'd like to move a motion with respect to that, is ask staff to work with the county when the new official plan is updated, and include treatment of assuming, I guess the recipe for assuming a privately owned road.
Capture that?
Well, it wouldn't be a privately owned road, but
We can work on
the
it.
proper word, yeah, whatever.
Work on that.
Policy surrounding.
Assumption of seasonal roads. We'll find that wording.
Okay. Seconder? Councillor Balmer? It's kind of in, well,
then maybe we'll just.
so sorry, Councillor Balmer. Councillor Goyd, if you're comfortable with this, we're just going to amend the initial motion and carry on. So I'll read it out here. Moved by Councillor Goyd, seconded by Councillor Spoulos, that report PD 2019-015 regarding the ownership of Township Road around Puslinch Lake and specifically Rhodes Road be received, and that the staff, together with the county, develop a policy detailing the process of assuming a road. We might wordsmith that a little more.
Yeah.
Okay?
Private road, I think.
But CAO and
We'll figure it out.
Appropriate
we
wording.
get the gist of it, all right? All in favor? All right, okay, thank you. Carried. Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Recreation Department, none. Mayor's updates. I didn't provide it in advance, but we have a crisis in Morriston. We have some individuals running around spray painting our baseball booths, our bleachers, and then they spray painted the Wellington County retaining wall on Badnock. And it appears to be young individuals by their talent at their artwork. So I contacted Paul Tribe at the Aberfoyle Public School and asked him to relay a message that, you know, this is not acceptable. This is not how we treat our facilities. This is vandalism, and, you know, treat our facilities better. I also contacted the OPP. And this isn't just because I live down there. This is, graffiti is very difficult to get a hold of and stop, so I want to try and nip this in the bud. And so the OPP is going to do a few more patrols around there, try to just maybe, I don't know, make a presence so this doesn't happen, because it's very costly to remove the graffiti, and then it just gives them another blank slate and they carry on. So so that's just with that. I had a meeting with Member of Parliament Michael Chong. I expressed, our need for these funding grants for the soccer field and baseball. He's obviously supportive of it. He provided a letter in support to the Director of Finance for the application. Also met with MPP Ted Arnott, expressed the same, not concerns, but, wanting this funding, and it's important for our community as it doesn't affect a burden on us. It's not putting in an ice rink where we're adding staff. This is just placement of infrastructure, and he was completely supportive of that. And I think Roma will be a great opportunity to wander the halls and try to get the odd member of parliament and just bend their ear, and I'll be cognizant of that when it comes up. So that's basically all I have for now. What else do we have? What's next? Any notices of motion? No? Okay. All right, we have the committee minutes. So moved by Councillor Ballmer, seconded by Councillor Goyda, that the minutes of the following committee meetings be adopted as written and distributed. A, March 4th, 2019, Post-Lunch Emergency Management Program Committee meeting. B, June 3rd, 2019, Heritage Committee meeting. C, June 17, 2019, Special Heritage Committee meeting. D, October 8th, 2019, Committee of Adjustment meeting. E, October 8th, 2019, Planning and Development Advisory Committee meeting. F, October 8th, 2019, Special Heritage Committee meeting. Any questions or comments on those? No, all in favor? Carried. Okay. Any municipal announcements? Councillor Spillis.
Yes, two of them. The Internet Committee has been meeting, and I'd like to report that we have a website now. It's postlunchighspeed.ca, all lowercase, .ca. It's basically a rudimentary website, and we want to start talking to some ISPs, and we can direct them to there and show we're professional and all that good stuff.
Excellent.
And the second thing is Santa's coming to town.
Yes. Hooray, with hot dogs.
So that's Sunday.
Excellent. I'm attending. Anybody else attending? Has anybody received an invitation for council to ride on a float as of yet?
No.
We're old news now.
Yeah, we're old news, yeah.
We have the old council smell now.
Yeah. Okay, any other municipal announcements? No, okay. Any unfinished business? Nope. Okay, bylaws. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Ballmer, seconded by Councillor Goyda, that the following bylaws be taken as read 3 times and finally passed in open council. A, bylaw 065-2019 be a bylaw to appoint a chief administrative officer clerk for the corporation of the Township of Portland and to repeal bylaw number 19/13. All in favor?
Well, just,
We can discuss it?
yeah, I think so. I think it deserves some discussion.
Absolutely. Councillor Ballmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As many of you may recall, when through the process of hiring the interim CAO, one of the duties that the interim CAO was going to be tasked with was finding the more permanent replacement. And I think on that regard, the interim CAO has certainly created a significant challenge for us by placing before us quite a suite of highly qualified candidates. So I want to thank you very much for the work you did in attracting what I thought was a much larger group of exceptional candidates than I was expecting to have to wade through. But it was highly educational, and I think we learned through the process from listening to all the candidates and listening to you, and even listening to our staff here, that how critical the CAO is in shaping the feel of the municipality and how the residents experience the municipality. So thank you for putting all those good candidates before us.
I would say the same thing. I think it was quite an experience even for myself to go through that process of interviewing the candidates and listening to what they had to say, listening to what each other had to say. And I think that in the end, we're going to come out really a lot better for it. So thank you very much for all the time and effort and work that you put into it. And I think I just look forward to, I guess, a new chapter for the township. So thank you.
I'd like to echo the sentiments of the other councillors. Thank you very much for your work. Very much appreciated, and too bad you couldn't stay on.
And, Pat, you and I have had a lot of conversations. My wife told me, "Why are you calling him at 7 o'clock in the morning?" I'm like, "He emailed me." It was morning, night. You worked so diligently at this, and I truly appreciate it. Thank your wife for all of this from all of our council, because we know your family made some sacrifices for this position. Again, you did an excellent job bringing the candidates forward, and on the first day, when we met them, or I guess it'd be the second day after we were through all of them, I felt terrible that I couldn't hire them all, right? Because they were so qualified, and we were splitting hairs. And to give some credit to the council that was there, it was very rewarding for myself when we were done on the second day. And I asked Pat, I said, "How much time do we have this room for?" And he said an hour, and I thought, I don't know if that's enough, right? Because I didn't know where we all stood, right? And we came to a consensus in half an hour. And we were all on the same page right from the get-go. But we each picked out different aspects of the candidates that we liked, but that all ended up being the same individuals that we brought forward. So I think it's excellent that all of us up here are working so well together, and I hope we can keep that trend going forward. And yes, we would like to keep Pat forever, but he's an old dog, so.
And you know what they do with old dogs and old horses.
Question for you, are you, you have a press release.
Yes, so maybe, well, thank you for those comments, and the process, I think, was very thorough. It was a difficult decision, but at the end, a decision was made, and the new CAO was Glenn, I'm going to hope I pronounce this right, Schwendinger, and we have a copy of his press release and a little bit of background. Maybe for the benefit of those in the audience and watching this on the webcast, Glenn brings a lot of experience to the job. He has over a dozen years as a CAO, most recently with Perth East. Prior to that, he was the manager of public works in that municipality for about 4 or 5 years. Prior to that, he worked for the region of Waterloo, and he had spent some time in Halton. And he has about 10 years of project management experience working for a very large engineering firm out of Waterloo. The start date for Glenn is the 16th of December. And there'll be a press release and something on the website as well. I would be remiss if I didn't say one thing, and that was when we got into the 3 finalists, all 3 commented to me that one of the reasons they were interested in the job was, just as the former mayor of Collingwood said earlier today, the way you behave at these meetings and the way you interact with one another and staff is unfortunately not the normal way of business in most municipalities these days. So all the candidates, the finalists in particular, spent hours watching reruns of council meetings. So either they're have no life, or they were interested in understanding what they were getting themselves into. And all 3 of the finalists said that they had watched all reruns of council meetings, and they were very much interested in the position because of you, because the council behaves in a rational, normal way, and treat staff with respect and treat one another with respect. And that was said throughout the whole process by all the candidates, because that's what really impressed them. The pay and the job and the work is all interesting, but they work for you, and it's good to know and have the opportunity to see how you interact, and that's one of the beautiful things about the World Wide Web. It's now there for people to see. So, and that really helped attract a lot of very good candidates for the position.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments or questions? All right, all in favor? Carried. I think we're going to go to close, right? Moved by Councillor Ballmer, seconded by Councillor Gordy, that council should go into closed session under Section 239 of the Municipal Act for the purpose of a confidential verbal report from interim CEO clerk Patrick Moyle regarding personal matters about an identifiable individual, the municipal or local board employees, and labor relations or employee negotiations, personal matters. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Thank you.